These people are warmongers. They are angry now, angrier than when the war was on, because they want the war to continue. The war goes on and allows them to keep projecting images of Israeli crimes as they see it, to keep demonizing the Israeli people. It's extraordinary that those people who loudest claim that there was a genocide are the ones who are now most vocally against the cessation of the war. What does that tell you? It tells you these people have no morals, that they've been lying to the world for 2 years now, and they stand condemned and they should be ashamed of themselves. They won't be ashamed because these people are incapable of feeling shame, but at least the rest of us can see now clearly what these people are and the extent to which they've deceived and lied and misrepresented who they are and what they stand for. These are people who I hold in the lowest regard. But at the moment, I'm not thinking of them, to be honest. I'm thinking of the people who made this glorious day possible. I'm thinking of the heroes of the IDF who sacrificed. Over 900 fell in battle so that others may live. I'm thinking of the United States that harnessed all of its diplomatic and economic power for the ultimate good, the saving of human lives. And I'm thinking of people like you, Chris, who for 2 years have elevated the voices of the hostages, have humanized them, have told their stories, have worn pins in solidarity, have written and spoken about them. And I'm truly grateful to you, Chris, and all the people out there, many of your viewers and your colleagues who have stood with us through this bleak and horrible time. We will never forget that.
Alex, stay with us if you can. Yes, our viewers have been staunch supporters of the Israeli people, as I believe the silent majority of all Australians have been. But what you're now seeing on your screens is history in the making. This is Air Force One about to touch down in Ben Gurion Airport in Israel with President Donald Trump in his second term as president, arriving to deliver peace in Gaza and forge a new future in the Middle East. Not only has he convinced Hamas through pressure on the Arab world to lay down its arms, he's convinced Israel to do the same while Hamas still had control of the central part of Gaza City. He has also pulled together a coalition of nations to try to reconstruct and rebuild Gaza and forge a new dawn in the Middle East. He will fly later today to Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt and meet with the leaders of more than 20 countries to start working on his medium-term plan to reconstruct Gaza and solidify this peace. Many, many difficulties and hurdles to come, but the diplomatic prospects are perhaps more prospective than they've been in many decades. Former Australian ambassador to Israel, Dave Sharma, is with us. This is a momentous opportunity. I don't want to be too dewy-eyed here when it comes to being too optimistic, Dave, but the prospects obviously are there for a real change in direction.
I think there are, and I think there is cause for optimism, Chris. It never pays to be too optimistic or naive when it comes to the Middle East, but I think what's changed fundamentally is the regional alignment of forces because of this war. Now, since this war started, we've seen Iran, which is the main backer of terror groups in the region, humbled. Its nuclear program set back several years, possibly decades. We've seen the Assad regime toppled. We've seen Hezbollah and its senior leadership decimated. We've seen the Houthis take a beating. And so suddenly the forces that are constructive in the region, the positive forces in the region, modern, forward-looking Arab Gulf states and Israel, they're the dominant grouping within the region now. People who want to live side by side, get on, trade, engage, be part of the modern world, they are the majority now in the Middle East. And that, I think, is why we should be a little more hopeful than we have been.
Turkey is there, Pakistan is there, Indonesia is there. This also bespeaks a notion, I suppose almost an ideology to make sure that the whole world embraces this problem. It's an issue for the Muslim world to fix, not just for the Middle East.
Yeah, and I think, look, Donald Trump was quite careful when, he curated this meeting 3 weeks ago now on the margins of the General Assembly and invited leaders from all the major Islamic nations, not just those in the Middle East. So the leader of Turkey, the president of Indonesia, Prime Minister of Pakistan, they were all part of this conversation, and he got them to buy in to his vision, his plan, his 20-point plan for the Middle East. And we're seeing the fruits of that today with the release of the hostages, and hopefully we will see another harvest tomorrow when they gather in Sharm el-Sheikh for this historic summer. There won't have been a summer like this for, probably 20 years, I would say. We're bringing in leaders of this group of countries to discuss peace in the Middle East, not just peace between Israel and Gaza, but a broader peace in the Middle East. So I think we have good reason to be at least positive and at least hopeful.
Exactly, and it's another example of very smart diplomacy from Donald Trump. He's trying to make use of that momentum, huge momentum today with this peace plan and the freeing of the hostages, but later in the day, our time, he'll be trying to make some use of that in Egypt. Live pictures here of Benjamin Netanyahu on the tarmac, waiting to welcome President Trump and the First Lady as the Air Force One there pulls up alongside the red carpet. I want to bring in Sharri Markson, Sky News host, who's with us on the program tonight, to get her thoughts here as Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump, two of the most hated figures in the world when it comes to the left side of politics. But there can be no escaping the facts here, Sharri. They are the ones who have delivered not just this peace for today, but a realistic new opportunity for lasting peace.
Exactly, the most realistic peace plan that has been put on the table. And so, Chris, we're just looking at this vision of Air Force One has arrived at Ben Gurion Airport in Israel. President Donald Trump is moments away from disembarking. He'll be accompanied by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. There's a military parade there to greet him, as you can see. The red carpet is literally being rolled out as we speak. This is an incredible moment. Israelis will be welcoming President Trump with open arms. He is being celebrated in Israel as a peacetime leader. You can see there, that's Israeli President Isaac Herzog standing at the top of the red carpet there. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu right beside him with their wives. I understand Jared Kushner, there you go, Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump are there as well to greet the president. So this is a remarkable occasion. Isaac Herzog, Benjamin Netanyahu. In the next few minutes, we will be watching President Trump disembark from Air Force One. What a historic day, Chris. What a privilege it is for all of us to be watching this. This will go down in history, the peace deal that Trump struck in Egypt when he came to see the release of the 20 living hostages.
There is no doubt about this.
Moment.
There is no doubt that this is an historic day. I want to get your thoughts on this, Alex Rivchin, because if this was the summit of the achievement, that the war was ended in Gaza and all the hostages were returned, it would be a momentous day. But I want to get your thoughts, Alex, on just how this day can actually be a new dawn, how it can actually be, rather than the end of this war, the start of a rebuilding where Palestinians will embrace peace, where the Islamist extremists might be kept at bay, and where the Arab countries and the wealthy Muslim nations will invest in that future rather than funding terrorist groups.
Well, there's such a moment of hope right now, and also the scenes that are projecting now of Air Force One on the tarmac there. It's such a poignant symbol of US power and goodness and contribution to the world. And when you have the US putting all its capacity towards something like this, the world changes. That's what a superpower can do. And so the world has seen over the last 2 years what comes from terrorism, from misery, from war, the deprivation and the horrors that stem from it. But they've also seen what can come from a good fighting force and deployed for benevolent means. And that's what we've seen here. And so the Palestinians, I think, will be contemplating now, was it all worth it? Were the horrors of the last 2 years worth it? Was October 7 worth it? And hopefully this will now turn a page and we will see a new era. Israel will ensure... Sorry, Chris, go on.
Sorry, Alex. I've got Alex Rivchin from the Australian Council of Jury. We've got Sharri Markson, Sky News host online. We're staying with Dave Sharma too, former Australian ambassador to Israel and now a Liberal senator for New South Wales. We'll come back to them. But as we watch President Trump disembark from Air Force One, and that reminder from Alex Rivchin that no matter what you think of Benjamin Netanyahu or Donald Trump, it is their strength, it is their use of military and diplomatic power that has brought us to this point. There is no mistaking that. It's a matter of what the rest of the world and they can do with it from here. Let's just listen in to see whether there's any sound, anything we should be listening to on the tarmac there at Ben Gurion Airport, Israel. Yes, a pregnant pause, you might say, there, as they all await at the other end of the red carpet for the President and the First Lady to come down. Apart from the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his wife there, of course, the Israeli President Isaac Herzog is there. They're political foes from days gone by, but both, of course, committed to the security of their country, the return of the hostages, and ending this war that has gone on now for 700 and more days. You also saw there Ivanka Trump and her husband, who's been absolutely instrumental in the diplomacy here. Let's have a listen in now. It is 9:52 a.m. in Israel, so President Donald Trump, when he's been met at the airport here, he will go some 30, 40 kilometres up the road to Jerusalem, where he will address the Knesset. There will be a meeting there with some hostage families. We don't know whether they're hostages released today or earlier releases. And not long after that, he'll leave Israel and fly direct to Egypt, Sharm el-Sheikh, for that meeting with more than 20 world leaders to talk about the next phase. Let's have a look now as the Israeli group meets with the President at the stairs. A military parade will ensue once they come down the stairs. Dave Sharma, the former ambassador to Israel, will be well aware of the protocols to be followed here. Obviously, the Prime Minister there, the President, Dave, also Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump, who have been there and been involved in the behind-the-scenes diplomacy. Explain how much preparation would have gone into this, because this has been a snap visit. They wouldn't have even been thinking about this a week ago.
No, look, to be honest, from what I can see, it looks quite well organised, given the amount of time and effort that's involved here. And right, they're all there in protocol order. So you've got the Israeli President, Isaac Herzog, who, as you said, was a political rival of Netanyahu's. He contested an election against him as the leader of the Labor Party in 2014, from memory. And his wife, Benjamin Netanyahu, and Sarah Netanyahu, his wife. I imagine the American ambassador that is there, Mike Huckabee, as well. Plus, you know, the heads of protocol, Jared Kushner, Ivanka Trump. It looks like, yeah, I can see Mike Huckabee now too. So it looks like the normal sort of receiving line you'd have for something like this. And of course, it looks like there's an IDF Guard of Honour too. And I expect they'll play the national anthems soon after President Trump descends from Air Force One.
Now, of course, whenever the President travels, the security is extraordinary. Tell us about just how particularly careful they would be flying into this part of the world, and presumably that explains why it is such a lightning visit. Not a long time on the ground in either Israel or Egypt, a few hours in each location, and then back to the US. That would be driven largely by security concerns, wouldn't it, rather than the President's diary?
Look, I think probably a bit of both. The fact that the visit's happening at short notice in some respects helps the security situation, because it means that, you know, there's not a program well known in advance, and adversaries. We can see
the President at the top of the stairs now, Dave. Continue, but we'll watch the President. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Cut me off when you need. But look, obviously the US has a lot of assets in the region, and I would have pre-positioned a lot of assets, including, you know, armoured vehicles, personnel, personal protective, you know, Secret Service details, helicopters, contingencies, evacuations, redundancies for all sorts of transport. So these are big things to arrange, but they've got a lot of experience in doing it, and they can turn these things on at pretty short notice. And in the Middle East, things often happen at short notice, and you need to be able to move quickly, and that's what President Trump has done today.
And there he is there, President, met by the President, of course, would be the protocol. Isaac Herzog there, meeting President Donald Trump first, then his wife, the First Lady, and presumably Benjamin Netanyahu will be next in line. There he is, arm in arm. You saw that little fist pump from Donald Trump at the top of the stairs. Let's listen in.
No hands. You're blocking everyone. Everybody.
They've had some tough discussions and some friendly discussions with each other over the years. I thought that fist pump from the President was so typical of Donald Trump, Alex Rivchin, as we saw him at the top of the stairs. It said it all. It was understated, but a fist pump for victory as he's coming down the stairs to meet with the most important leader in the region and later today with other leaders, knowing that there is so much more to be done.
Or not, he knows that he's the peacemaker of this time. And as you said, Chris, in Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump, you have two of the most maligned and marginalised in some regards political figures around the world, but they are political survivors. They are canny, they are successful, and here they have done something which I think few people thought possible. They have found a way to get all the hostages home. They have settled on a peace which will, God willing, see Hamas disarm. They have charted a new course for the entirety of the Middle East, and they deserve absolute credit for it.
We're nearly out of time, so if I could ask you briefly before we hand over this coverage to Peter Credlin at 6 o'clock, I just want to get a brief thought from you about how much hope you have for the anti-Semitism and the social division in this country subsiding because the war is over.
It won't simply evaporate, it won't subside. And we've seen from the protesters that we spoke about earlier in the show, the extremists, they're still at it, they're not going to desist, they feel ascendant, they feel like they've formed a movement. But looking at these scenes, this gives us greater strength and courage to fight. If peace can come from the clutches of a horrible war like this, then anything we face here domestically, I think we can overcome. And there are good people in this country. There are many who stand with us against anti-Semitism. We'll work with them and we'll make this country better than it has been.
Alex Rivchin, thanks so much for joining us on this momentous day. Briefly from you, Dave Sharma, why isn't Australia invited to this meeting in Egypt? We'd offered to provide some help in the enduring peace, but Australia's not there.
We've sidelined ourselves, Chris, from any position of influence. That's been the Albanese and Penny Wong position. I mean, I just make this point. The reason we're here today is Hamas has been militarily and diplomatically put under immense pressure. Australia has been working against that throughout these past 2 years, legitimising Hamas, strengthening Hamas and reserving all their criticism for Israel. That's why we are now relevant.
Dave Sharma, thanks so much for joining us. Dave Sharma, Liberal Senator for New South Wales, former Australian Ambassador to Israel. Thanks to everybody else who's joined us during this coverage over the past hour. Momentous events. Our coverage tonight will continue here on Sky News. Don't forget Tony Abbott's documentary from 7:30 to 8:30. Shari will be back after that at 8:30. Coming up next, Peter Credlin.
All right, you're coming live to Credlin here. There's no normal opening to the show because we have extraordinary events coming out of Israel there. We're at the Ben Gurion airport. You can see Air Force One is there on the tarmac, and this truly is an historic day, not just in the Middle East, but in politics right around the world. We hope this is the commencement of peace with the return of hostages. And of course, to secure the peace, we have arriving now into Israel the President of the United States, the man who withstood the calls from around the world to recognise a Palestinian state a couple of weeks ago in the United Nations. And by standing firm, he and Arab states and Israel have delivered this peace, despite, of course, what our Prime Minister in Australia might want to say, that recognising Palestine brought today to fruition. Our thoughts and prayers are obviously with the families of everyone connected to those hostages as we wait and hold our breath around the world that they will actually be delivered now to those they love. Joining me now, Sky News political contributor Chris Uhlmann. Chris, welcome. As I said, it's an unusual start to the show. We can see why that is. We've got Benjamin Netanyahu there, of course, the Prime Minister of Israel. We've got the President of Israel, other dignitaries there, Mike Huckabee and others on the tarmac. If there are any comments from Donald Trump to the media, we will cut in immediately and bring them to our viewers. But give me your reflections on what is an extraordinary day in Israel.
Well, Peter, this is unalloyed good news. It's 737 days since those horrific attacks on October 7 when 251 hostages were taken, people were brutalised, and that's what began all this, and we can never forget that, and those people have been held hostage ever since. Many of them have died. Now we've seen 7 people released. We're hoping to see 20 released, and of course no one will relax until every single one of those hostages is back with their families and the bodies of those who have died are returned to their loved ones. And so this day is a momentous day in this particular war, but of course it is the first step along a long and difficult path. What we will see in exchange is there will be a 2,000, more than 2,000 hostages will be, not hostages, more than 2,000 Palestinians will be released by Israel. Among them will be some hardened Hamas fighters. So, of course, that does mean those people will go back to Hamas. And as we see Israel retreat from the front line and move back to a different position where it begins to return some of that territory, the concern, of course, would be that Hamas will start to take up that space again. Of course, they're armed. So what we need to see from the international community is that void being filled by those states in the Middle East that can do something about it.
Yeah, we'll get to a discussion of those prisoners that will be released because, as you say, there are 2,000 of them. There has been prisoners exchanged for hostages all the way through the last 2 years. There are also reports that 135 of them are set to be released and leave Israel. I would have concerns that the Australian government need to rule out the return of any of these Palestinian prisoners into Australia. We know we've taken 3,000 Gazans on visas to date, tourism, short-term visas, of course, but once in Australia, a lot of them have been now transferred onto protection visa applications. So for people at home, they are trying to remain in Australia as refugees. So we'll stay with that issue, of course, for the domestic implications potentially for Australia, Chris. But your broader point, reports today that already Hamas police force operatives are back on the streets of Gaza. Whether they call themselves a different organisation, there is genuine concern that the people who will return to running Gaza will be those of the terrorist stripe of Hamas in some other guise. And of course, that is critical to this being a lasting peace, that the terrorism activity that we have seen for many years, basically since the Israelis left the Gaza Strip about 15 years ago, that cannot return to this area of land that's not just dominated world news for 2 years, but I have to say has seen the West turn itself inside out. We've seen protests on our streets. We've seen the scourge, the return of anti-Semitism. And these are the things that as much as we want to see peace return to Israel, we want to see peace return to our city streets and our Australian community as well.
Yeah, and I fear, Peter, that all of that next step will be very hard, both what happens in Israel and what happens in Australia after this, because it seems to me the large group of Australians is intent on the fact that it wants to see Israel wiped from the face of the earth in the same way that Hamas does. They're not interested in a two-state solution. If they are chanting from the river to the sea, they're talking about erasing the state of Israel. They're not talking about anything else. So those people inside our own borders are of deep concern to us. And inside Gaza, of course, it's going to be what does happen from now on. Now, that's a very detailed plan that the President of the United States has agreed with others, but that now has to see the next steps take shape. And those next steps, the most important part of that is that there not be a void in Gaza as the Israeli Defence Force begins to move out of the areas it now occupies, because obviously Hamas will try and fill that space. Now, I know there's been talk about a board that will run all of this, but there needs to be troops that will take the place and can enforce some kind of peace in Gaza that disarms Hamas. Now, of course, they would never want that. So this is where all of this stuff from here on in gets ridiculously difficult.
We know, of course, there were watching images there of the Prime Minister Netanyahu and the President Donald Trump sitting there waiting to depart. We've been advised that the President, the earlier intention, and we think that still stands, is that he will privately meet with hostages that have been released. You mentioned there's 7, Chris. We're not entirely sure whether they are in the hands of the Israelis. They were transferred, we are told, by the terrorist organisation Hamas to the Red Cross. There'll be obviously medical checks and things, but we're told those arrangements will be private. They will not be media events, that Donald Trump wants to meet with the returnees privately. And of course, then he will speak in the Israeli parliament. It's known as the Knesset. I'll make the point, in the Knesset, in the Israeli parliament, elected by the people of Israel, are people of almost every faith. There are Arabs, there are Muslims, there are Christians, and of course there are Jewish Israelis. So it is a very representative, very democratic parliament. The United States President will make an historic address there. It will be a little bit like those addresses that the Pope makes, Chris, where it's to the people of Rome and the people of the world. This will be to the people of Israel and to the people of the world, as we all watch and share the joy, absolute joy here, with Israelis about the return of their people. But I have to say, Chris, you know, it feels Pyrrhic. Is Pyrrhic the right word? Certainly poignant that we have seen such enormous loss of life, that we know the origins of this attack were in terrorism against innocent civilians. There's been almost 1,000 of the Israeli army killed, many thousands, of course, across civilians across the border, put in harm's way by Hamas, killed in this 2-year conflict. But I guess the concern is at what price in our own societies that we now have this scourge of anti-Semitism. We've seen hate on our streets. We've seen basically jubilation about the end justifies the means in terms of bringing about a Palestinian state. And I have to say, in terms of Australia too, we've broken 70 years of bipartisanship. So as wonderful as these scenes we shortly will see in Hostage Square are, they've come at enormous cost to humanity.
Yeah, it's a cost that keeps rising, and it's very difficult to discern. One of the things that we do know from the outset was what Hamas intended, because, of course, after those first attacks, Hamas could have ended this war at any stage by returning the hostages and agreeing to negotiate. It decided it would not do that, because the entire intent of this was to put the people of Gaza on the line in this campaign and know that Israel would react with fury and hope that a lot of Gazans would die. That was at the outset, that was the calculation, that Israel would discredit itself in the face of the world as it tried to hunt down Hamas and tried to get back its hostages. There would be civilian casualties. Why would there be civilian casualties? Well, because Hamas basically puts all of its equipment and all of its sensitive sites underneath hospitals and underneath schools. They would be prepared for everyone in Gaza to die as long as Israel was discredited. Now, unfortunately, that part of their campaign, I believe, has been outrageously successful around the world. We have seen the allies of Israel abandon it in the United Nations as pressure from within their own communities. And don't forget, that's where that all came from. When we saw Macron and when we saw Anthony Albanese and when we saw Mark Carney from Canada and when we saw Keir Starmer from the UK responding with recognising a state that doesn't exist, they were doing that because of domestic political pressure. That was the audience they were playing to. And that comes to your second point. That pressure has grown remarkably over time in places like Australia and the UK and in Canada, where we've seen people on the streets who clearly have an agenda that goes well beyond just trying to end the war in Gaza, their intention is that the state of Israel be erased from the map. And I don't think there's any getting around that. And what we've seen now is a rise of anti-Semitism, which I don't believe now we'll be able to quell. Now that the genie's back out of the bottle, I think that that's going to be a problem for quite some time to come.
I have to ask you, as we're watching there the motorcade depart, and as I said, the President's on his way to a private meeting with returned hostages and will then speak at the Knesset. Of course, we will bring all of that live to you here on Sky News, and at 7:30 tonight, at 7:30, the airing, of course, of Tony Abbott's documentary, a 3-part documentary about the history of Australia. The book's on sale from today. The documentary kicks off tonight, but it's a big day right around the world. I will just quickly jump into some domestic politics with you, Chris, because let's just stay at a light touch in terms of this tax backflip today from the Treasurer, that there will be no longer the taxation of unrealised capital gains on super. There will be taxation of super for balances over 3 million, and there'll be a new tax in relation to balances over 10 million. But the unrealised gains component has been dumped. You have to make the profit now to be taxed on the profit, which is standard taxation law in Australia. However, the announcement timing of this, the Prime Minister's overseas on a 7-day holiday, we're told, and the Treasurer does this a huge backflip on the day that he knows the world will be looking across at Israel. Just give me a sense of the rat-cutting politics at play there.
Well, I long ago stopped being cynical about, gave up any hope of being anything other than cynical, I should say, about the way that politicians time their announcements of things. And, they used to always talk about putting out the trash on a Friday. Well, certainly today, if you were trying to put out anything that wasn't very palatable, then today's the day to do it domestically in Australia, because all of us knew whether or not these hostages were released, that would be the story of this day. And we know that it will go 7 pages deep into many of the newspapers tomorrow. So any bad news on the front, perhaps apart from the Australian Financial Review, may well get pushed back in the newspapers. But I don't think that's a story that's going to go away. And quite clearly, the Prime Minister intervened in this and rolled his Treasurer on it. That's the way it looks, certainly the way it looks. The Treasurer says that's not the case. But what you have to wonder about all this too is, what's the role of Treasury anymore? What Treasury recommends to a minister or allows or stays silent when a minister says they are going to tax unrealised gains on anything? That's money you do not have. That goes against all the principles of taxation, and I think one of the real concerns must have been whether or not this ends up in court and they lose.
Yeah, and of course the criticisms from Paul Keating, who is and has long been a political hero and mentor to the Treasurer. He was the subject of the Treasurer's political PhD. He's not an economist, the Treasurer. He's got a PhD in Paul Keating, basically. They would have hit home pretty hard.